just a dumb hick, man. This Zoom, I feel like I'm Star Trek this morning, man. This is crazy stuff. First of all, I want to say thanks to both you and Paul, and I'm very thankful. I think you want me to talk about the pandemic. That's what you said when you got a hold of me, how it's affecting us. Actually, the pandemic, instead of being a negative for my ministry, has actually been a positive. We haven't shut anything down. Services are open if anybody wants to come. Because the neat thing can happen is, they said the churches were limited to how many people they could have, but because of all I've been through, if you've read my books and all the attacks on the codes and so forth, they recoded me so they could shut me down. I'm coded not as a church, but as a homeless shelter now. And at a homeless shelter, you're not limited on the numbers and what you can do, basically. So they've left me alone. So we've seen people coming in. We've had some non-residents come into our services. And the shelter is doing fantastic. We're seeing a lot of salvations every week. We baptized a bunch of folks yesterday. What was really neat is one of the kids we baptized, he's an 8-year-old boy. His grandmother took him and 3 of her grandsons and lived in a tent because her son-in-law couldn't be having contact, and her daughter went to jail. And where she was staying at the rent, she couldn't pay the rent, and so she took her grandsons and put up a tent and went out and moved into a tent. And those 4 grandsons showed up. Last year I baptized one of them, and last night I baptized another one, an 8-year-old boy. And it's pretty hard to describe when you have a little 8-year-old boy come and grab you by the leg and say, Pastor, 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 I got to tell you something. And I said, well, what you want to tell me? He said, I want to tell you that when you was preaching, he said, I accepted Jesus into my heart. And we got so many stories of those. We've got kids thanking me they got shoes on their feet now and able to have something to take to school with them. But what we've seen, the other thing, not just with us, but it's caused some of the churches in Maine to, a couple of them contacted me, said, we opened our doors, and because the code people said we could allow 10 people to spend a night in our church. And so they opened them up and just let them come in and spend the night, and which was awesome. And we've tried to encourage others to do that, do more and more, but most of the churches are scared to do that because I don't know how you all take this, but it's just the truth. Churches have gotten to the point where we're more concerned about how our buildings look and how our people look than we are people. And so they're afraid they're going to come in and they're going to hurt something. And that really bothers me a lot. If you read my books, you know it does. And my 4th book deals a lot with this pandemic, a lot of the situations. But the other thing it's done is given us more food. What's really funny is I went to the grocery store, and it's actually Paul and Dave both got my manuscripts, my 4th book. So this is one of my stories, basically. I went to the grocery store, and these shelves are all empty. And where I turn, I'm going empty shelves. And people are coming to me, go, well, we got all these people coming to your shelter for food outside. How are you going to feed them with no food and the empty shelves? And I went in, I saw the shelves, and I dropped my head a little bit, I have to admit. And I was just thinking, Dad, what you doing here? This is where we get our food from, is these stores with the empty shelves. And if there's nothing on the shelves, then how's it going to get to us? Which seemed like a logical thing to me. And I got back to the shelter that morning for prayer meeting, and our van drove in, and it was packed to the max. And I'm going, what is this? I was just over there. They said, well, something weird is happening, Pastor Barry. They said, we were told that they can't keep the food after 2 o'clock, all the deli stuff, because of the pandemic. They have to clear everything out and put in new. And they got nothing to do with all this food. So even though the shelves are empty, we're getting more food than we ever got. We gave out, I don't always get out for poundage, but I think it was yesterday, so we gave out over 1,000 pounds of food yesterday. More and more people are coming to the pantry for more and more food, because our community, they can't buy it at the stores because the shelves are empty, so they come and get it from us. that are getting it from the stores that have empty shelves. Now, I'm telling you, only dad can pull this crap off, man. I'm telling you, it's really weird. And it's almost indescribable how this is all working. So in the midst of where people are lacking, we're getting more. And I was sharing in my book, I was watching on TV, and I'm sure you guys have too, and seen the news, and a lot of us out in California and some of these other states, and they showed the lines of cars waiting to get food. They were lined up for like 2 hours. They were giving away food. And they would close after the 2 hours, and there were still lines waiting. And I went back and I was telling my folks at the shelter, I said, you know how blessed we are? I said, you know, I don't know how those folks, moms and dads, are going back to their families and saying, maybe we get something to eat tomorrow. There's no food. And it really, those things really got to me a lot watching it. And then I come back, and instead of our lines emptying, no matter how many are out there, we have food to cover everybody. We're getting so much food, we had to double what was given because it started to go bad. And while I'm watching on TV, these lines waiting for it, we're flooded with it. And it's blowing my mind how God can take care of his own people. But it's what comes to mind is like Egypt and Israel back in Joseph's time, when, you know, there was no food, but Joseph had the food and he was able to feed them. But the other thing was also, the big deal was when they come out of Egypt, when Israel did, and the plagues were on, and the plagues only hit the Egyptians, didn't hit the Israelites. And I kind of look at what we're doing right now, and it's like the pandemic's hitting all around us, but it's not touching my shelter. Everything's just going positive. It's outside of God, there's no explanation. And people ask me, how do you explain this, Pastor? I say, God. No, how do you explain it? God. How else do you explain it? I can't explain. I'm just a dumb hick from Skowhegan. You know, I'm not this big educated dude that can figure out all the ins and outs. I just look at it and go, we got food. They don't have food. What's the difference? God. That's the only equation I have. And God just keeps pouring it on. I don't know how much time I have, but I want to talk about how God is touching lives. Just for the pandemic, I had the privilege of speaking to a homeless shelter down in Arkansas called the Little Rock Compassion Center. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it, but it reminds me a lot of the one that Frank was talking about in Terry, like theirs. It's a large one. A pastor started it, and they run faith-based. It's the largest one in Arkansas. And I went in, had the honor of speaking there when I was doing a tour down there. And I watched these guys walk in, and I saw these dead eyes. I'm telling you, it was like watching dead men walking. My wife and I sat there, watched them come in. But I started sharing about the compassion of Jesus to them. And I shared out of Acts 2 and 4, where people met needs and all of this. And I said, look, I want you to know God's not letting you down. It's the church is letting you down. That's what's letting you down. We're told to love our neighbors. And if the churches all did their thing, you would not be out on the streets. If you're not there because of Jesus, don't want you taken care of. His body isn't doing it. And I said, he loves you so much, he died for you. Then I give him the gospel. Then I give them an invitation to come up. And they, you know, we had, last time I was there 16 guys come forward. But one guy in particular blew me away. He walked up and he's patting over his heart with his hand like this. Tears coming down his eyes. My wife and I still talk about it. He looked at me, he says, Pastor Barry, he says, I felt it right here when I prayed. And his eyes were different. The best way I can describe it, I've been there when people have died. My dad passed and I was there. And the immediate thing was you see the spirit leaves the eyes. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. And it was like there was no spirit in his eyes when he walked in, but there's spirit in his eyes when he walked out. That's what Daddy's doing. This is what churches can find if they jump on board with the homeless. And right now the homeless is they're really getting talked about a lot. I don't know how many watch America's Got Talent. That's one of my wife's favorite shows. She loves to watch that. Well, Monday night, there was a group literally come off the street. They were a homeless choir. And they looked homeless. One of the women, she sat down front. She's like 80 years old and half her teeth. Another guy was in the back. He was all worn out with drugs. He was all scruffy. They had a T-shirt alike. And other than that, they looked like they do on the street. And they were on the streets. They were still homeless. And this woman works with them. And they come in to sing on America's Got Talent. They wrote their own song. And it was about the streets, about life on the streets. And then this old lady down front, she's been, I think she's 8 years, she's been on the streets since she was 8 years old. And she spoke in the middle of the song. You know how sometimes singers will stop, they'll talk, they're not singing, they'll say the words. And she talked about mothers and their daughters on the streets and stuff. And I'm sitting here bawling like a baby. Their voices weren't the best voices I ever heard. They weren't the best choir that's ever been on AGT. I can tell you that right now. But I saw people bawling like babies watching them. I saw the judges bawling. And I saw the MC come running down, and he said, it's not enough just to talk. We got to do something. I thought he was going to pass the hat. I didn't know. You know. He ran down front, and if you ever seen the show, you hit this gold buzzer, and it puts them into the live show down the road. They don't have to go through any more qualifying. And he put them into the live show. He said, this is the least I can do. And then they started talking about the homeless. It's the first time I've heard a show like that even mention homelessness. But God is doing something right now in America. He's trying to raise America, the American churches to rise them up, to really be the body of Jesus Christ. Reach out with his arms, his legs, his mouth, and do the things he's called us to do as their neighbors. I think the United States has the greatest opportunity we've had in its history right now to have a revival through the homeless population in America. I think we are so honored to be able to do this. If we can start looking at these people as people and don't see them as worthlessness or down or out or whatever, it'll be a whole different ballgame. I have a real good friend now that's came to me off the streets, and he's in my book. But his name is Dana Liberty, and he used to be a superstar hockey player. His team played in the national tournaments. He was their star way back. He's 60, just turned 67. He went on to be a lawyer, like Mr. Mikowski. And then he became a DA in southern Maine. Then he became the Assistant Attorney General of the state of Maine. And then he went under a bridge. That's where I got him. He had a disaster happen in his family he couldn't handle. He went and took a bottle. And he went into a bottle. His family didn't want him around if he was drinking. So what was really weird is the policemen that he used to work with were the ones that had to arrest him, and they didn't even want to, but they told him, you can't stay under this bridge, Dana. He said, I know. He said, if you leave, we won't arrest you. Please, Dana, don't make us arrest you, please. He said, so he stepped out from the bridge, and then when they were gone, he went back under. And eventually, they picked him up. They took him in, and he stood before a judge that he used to be the DA in front of. And they sent him to jail. He spent a little time in jail. And then from there, he came to us. And he's in my book. He told me to use his story. Any way you can help us. He said, you saved my life. Anything you can do. Well, I took him to a church in Oxford, Maine. And I had him speak, because when I travel all over speaking, some of you already know that. I've spoken at NCS. So. And I took Dana with me because he used to be the DA in southern Maine. And I thought this would be pretty cool, you know, and he didn't look like he did that. Oh, by the way, he still has his license with the bar. He's still a licensed lawyer. He just doesn't practice. And so I announced who it was, and everybody's looking with this quizzical look because they knew the name. And then I said homeless, and they didn't think that was the same guy. Dana gets up front and he goes, well, first of all, I want to tell you, I am the same Dana Liberty that was your district attorney. I am the same Dana Liberty used to be the assistant attorney general for the state of Maine. Yes, it is me. And I can't explain the expressions on people's faces. And then I did a Q&A, like we're going to do at the end of this. And one question he asked Dana, and I put it in my book because I've told it everywhere I've traveled since then. He said, we know that homeless need food and clothes and housing. But there's something about the homeless we should know that we don't know. And Dana, he looked at him and he said, yes, stop looking at us like we're homeless. We're just people. He said, I've met the best people in my life under a bridge, the nicest families. They're not bad people. They just got situations. And they're just people. And I tell you could have heard a pin drop in that place. And as I was leaving, one after another come to me and go, wow, I think we got to change how we look at things around here. I said, I think you're right. But they're not the only ones. Churches, many of them don't want the homeless in there. They don't want to sit next to them. I had one. They all left my church. Those who read my first book, no, they left the church. There won't be those kind of people. But since we've taken in those kind of people, we've seen 200 to 400 come to Jesus Christ a year. Before that, salvation was something people talked about and never even saw in my church. And we've got so close. They're some of our best friends now that have come in off the streets. And the children, it's incredible. The guys were building them a little house out back in my church last night. We went for the Baptist. You guys see this, Pastor Barry? And they had some pallets, wood pallets. That stuff comes on, you know what pallets are. And they built them a house out of it. And they had a little walkway. The kids got involved. And these kids thought they had $1 million home. They thought it was better than yours, Paul. I haven't been to these other guys, so I'm saying you because I've been to your home. They're pretty nice, by the way. And I'm looking around and I'm going, these kids don't know they're in a homeless shelter. And I praise God for that. To them, this is family. The folks in the shelter, their aunts or uncles, that's what they call them. They're loved to pieces. They're not on the streets. And those little boys, when I got baptized, he was one who was all proud of the little house, one of them. And to see people come from the tents to this is something to behold. Share with what Dana said. Please start seeing people as people. Let's not categorize them. You know, Dana may not be in the court, but he's no less a lawyer. He has no less mind than the other lawyers, or less talent. He just had an emotional situation he couldn't handle. And I know it'd be hard for you to picture yourself in that same place, but as he says, if you'd have told me this a few years ago, I'd laughed you out of town. I had a big fancy home, fancy cars, boats, everything. He said, the experience I'm having under a bridge with these families, and he's told me, he said, I wouldn't trade it for all the riches I had. He said, I'm happier now than I was as a DA. And he said, I feel like I'm living now. I just saw him this morning. I actually just bought him a cup of coffee this morning. He's one of my best friends in the world now. He calls me his daddy. I'm only 4 years older. That's the only thing I don't like about this thing, all right? They all start calling me dad. I've had guys older than me call me dad. It's a little funny, you know what I'm saying? And yeah, but I hug them and say, if you want to call me dad, call me dad. These are my babies. Yeah, when we started out, we had to build this men's shelter, and that's how I got the codes changed, by the way. They coded me a shelter and not a church at that time, which helps me today. And I said I'd build a building, no money, no anything. We didn't have any monies and no equipment, nothing. If you read my book, you'll see all of that. 80% of my people left the church, so we didn't have any funds. And we're getting the donation of cement, so the cement's coming in. I'll do you two quick stories. So I didn't know, I was thinking you all know all of this. So and we get ready to lay the cement, and Jake, my engineer, comes up and he says, Pastor Barry, we got to lay the cement. And I said, well, lay the cement. I'm not a contractor. I don't understand cement, all right? And he said, it was in January in Maine. And he says, well, it can't snow for 3 weeks in January in Maine. Now, you may not be a Mainer, but if you was a Mainer, you would understand it always snows in Maine in January. And so I go, what? He goes, yeah. So I put my hands up in the air and raised them up. And I said, Dad, I got to go 3 weeks and no snow. You held the sun from Josh for 24 hours. I'm asked for 3 weeks, no snow. Dropped my hands, said, let's go for it. He said, go for it. I don't have a choice because the story goes, I had to be doing something every day or they're going to shut me down. They let me stay going as long as I build a shelter. So I had to be working. We worked every day for 3 years, nonstop. And I said, I don't have a choice. So anyway, he lays the cement. Well, 2 weeks go by and it snows everywhere in Maine but over our area. And then Channel 2 newsman from Bangor comes on and he goes, there's a phenomenon in central Maine. He said, I don't understand it. It's snowing everywhere but central Maine. And he says, it looks like there's a bubble over central Maine. I don't understand it. So we come in the morning and go, there's Jesus a bubble. Jesus is the bubble. So we go 2 weeks. Now I got one more to go. And we get all 3 weeks. And I'm feeling pretty good. And then Jake comes to me. He says, Pastor, we need snow now or the cement will break. And I go, what? He said, we got to have snow now. The cement hasn't snowed for 3 weeks. So everywhere but us. So I put my hands up in the air. I said, Dad, I need snow. Less than 48 hours, we're covered. And we never stopped. We never lost anything for that 3 weeks. And we got totally covered and then we finished it up. The other one was I had him come to me and John came to me and he was the guy who was building my metal stuff. We had to build metal stairs on the back of the shelter, escape stairs, exit stairs. So he comes to me at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He says, Pastor Barry, we need a welder to help me finish up, but can't get by with the homeless help this time. I got to have a certified welder to work with me. I said, well, how much are they, John? He says, $50 an hour. I said, when do you need him? He said, tomorrow morning. I said, of course you do. So he said, well, we can't go on without it, and this is our last project, so they're going to shut us down if we don't build it. So I put my hands in the air and I said, Dad, I need a welder, certified welder by tomorrow morning. So I'm 3 towns over. I'm in Smithfield. There's Smithfield, Norridgewock, and Skowhegan. That's how it runs. And I'm coming back from Smithfield. I'm driving into Norridgewock, and there on the corner of Cumberland Farms, which is a convenience store with gas stuff, is a guy dressed in summer clothes in late fall, and he's getting all over, and he looked like a guy with that has cold chills. So I drive up to him, roll the window out my truck, and I said, where you going? He said, I don't know. I just got out of jail. I got no place to go. And I said, would you want to go to a homeless shelter? He said, you know, there is one. I said, I got one. He said, you got one? I said, yeah. He said, you got some hot water? I said, oh, yeah, I got soap too, by the way. And he said, you got some food? I said, hot meals, bed, everything. You got some clothes? I said, we got winter clothes. He said, I'm in. So he jumps in the truck with me. We're about 3.5 miles, halfway between Norridgewock and Skowhegan. And I turned to him. I said, by the way, what's your name? He said, Ernie Noble. And I said, Ernie, when you're not in jail and you're not hitchhiking, what do you do? And he says, I'm a certified welder. I said, of course you are. So he stayed for 3 weeks, turned down $50 an hour jobs. He said, I won't leave. He found Jesus, stayed clean. He was an alcoholic. But he worked all over the country. But he was an alcoholic. He'd get fired and rehired after he got out of jail again. He was that good. He built 3 crosses on my stairs on his own because he got saved. And he did that before he left. So I could tell these stories all day. If you read my books, they're right full of them.
Whatever it's worth, my favorite story was when you put the governor of the state in a headlock.
You like that one?
Yeah.
Actually, it was a U.S. congressman, but it's the same. That's the story. Yeah. That was kind of exciting. That was pretty stupid, by the way. I will go on record. That was about as dumb a thing as I've pulled, but it worked. That's how we got food today. So if you ever want to get food in a homeless shelter, find a U.S. congressman, put him in a headlock. Well, what happened was I got notice just before Christmas that you had to go through the Good Shepherd food bank now to get any food, and we weren't hooked up with them. They turned me down 3 times because we're religious. Now you figure that one out. The Good Shepherd food bank turns you down because you got religious services. And if you stayed in my shelter, we made you go to those services if you lived there. So they turned us down. I'd finally given up. And then my nephew who worked for Hannaford contacted me. He said, well, you'll lose your contract with them if you don't have Good Shepherd. And I said, oh, praise God, something big's going to happen. He goes, what? I said, something big's got to happen. I was out on the road with my wife, and I said, okay, I didn't even get shook up. I can't believe it. For once in my life, I didn't go run scared. So I asked him where I could go, find their main office at Auburn, Maine. So I grabbed one of my staff, and we headed for Auburn, Maine. And I had my GPS on. I just got one. I'm just getting used to it. But anyway, I'm traveling down there, and I'm using the GPS, and it's always accurate. I use them all the time. And we're driving down, and all of a sudden, it takes me to a spot, and it says, you've reached your destination. And there was nothing but trees. And I'm going, that's not where I want to go. It's not my destination. So I said, so I punched it in again. And I got down the road, and it says, turn around. So I turned around and took me right back to the same spot again. I did this for a half an hour, and finally I'm screaming at this GPS, and I'm saying very unpastoral things about now. And my guy with me, he says, you do know that you're screaming at a GPS. I go, I don't care. I got to scream. So I'd lose my mind. So I said, I'm just going to drive. Well, I drove, and I found the place. And it was it was about 500 yards from where I kept turning me and sending me back the other way. So we go in, we go up an elevator, and I meet the gal there. She says, we're not open because of Christmas. I just happen to be in here taking phone calls, but we're really not open. Nobody's around. And I said, well, I know I'm talking about getting food. She said, well, there's nobody to talk to. She said, would you like an application? I said, I've had 3 of them. They ain't done me any good yet. I need to talk to somebody. And she says, well, I'll give you an application anyway. So I threw my hands up in the air right in front of her. And I said, Dad, this is not what I was looking for. I expected something didn't happen. About then, the elevator door opened, and off comes this guy with this entourage behind him. And he walks on up, and he comes up, and he just stares at me. And I'm staring back at him. So there we are, staring back and forth. And I said, I guess I'm supposed to know you, huh? And he goes, well, I figured. He said, I'm U.S. Congressman Michael Michaud. And I don't know what got into me. I grabbed him around the neck, poked him in the chest, and said, you're just the guy I was looking for. That's why I'm here. And his eyeballs are bigger than my fist, and he's just staring at me. Nobody hit me or nothing. Nobody did. And I got him in this chokehold. And my staff member standing there, and his eyeballs are coming out, and he's shaking his head. So I finally said, here's my situation. I said, I got a shelter. I'm feeding people, but I won't be able to feed them unless you talk to these guys and get me some food. I said, they won't give me a contract. And I said, I got a 7-year-old boy that hugged my leg the other night, thanking me for a place to stay and something to eat. I said, that 7-year-old's going to go hungry unless you do something. I said, can I use your name to help me with the Good Shepherd? He said, absolutely. As soon as I did that, a girl behind me screamed. She says, no, it's fine. No, you're not going to lose no contracts. And I turned around, she says, tell me your story. And I said, here's my situation. You guys turned me down 3 times. She says, do you make people go to the church services? I said, I do if they live there. She said, well, put it this way. What if I walked in and I'm hungry, but I don't want to go to your services. You're going to feed me. I said, it doesn't involve you unless you're a resident. She goes, oh, well, I'm going to make an exception to the rule then. That's a good exception. So I'm going to give you 2 contracts now. We'll give you one for a homeless shelter and a pantry too. So you can have both. I go, okay. She says, call this girl, tell her to give you the contract. So I'm driving down the highway, and I get this girl on the phone, and she's telling me she's a Good Shepherd. And I said, yeah. I said, I need 2 contracts for my homeless shelter. And she says, well, it's Christmas time, and I'm not doing anything right now. Nobody's here or nothing like that. You haven't got me on my personal number. I said, where'd you get it? And I said, well, this little woman gave it to me. She said, describe that little woman. I said, well, she was a little tiny, dirty blonde, kind of, skinny little thing. She says, oh, we got no problem. She says, you got your contracts. Well, I'll take care of it. I go, what? She says, do you know who that little skinny woman was? And I said, no. She says, she's the president of Good Shepherd Food Bank. I said, of course she was. How you ever read her? Says, but she was giving the congressman a tour. He was going to decide to keep giving federal funding to them. That's what he was there for. So I caught him right in the middle of his tour to make a decision if Good Shepherd is going to get their money next year. And he said I could use his name. Of course he did. So if you get a good congressman in a headlock, there's no telling what could happen for you.